Bring us up to date on that $40 million campaign. How is it going, and did it change anything when we had two convictions last week, or earlier this week, of close aides to the president?
Well, I don't think there's any question, David, that it did change. I think that it turns out that at least people running TV shows and elected officials can only accept evidence sometimes when it comes tied up in a bow from a federal prosecutor. And so what we saw was Mr. Manafort's conviction, and we saw Michael Cohen's guilty plea, and because they came through a court system, those became information that people could look at and count on. Prior to that, we had an immense amount of information showing that Mr. Trump is corrupt, that he is lawless, and he breaks the law every day. But because it didn't come through the court system, somehow people couldn't accept that as information that was strong enough basis for impeachment. So something really did change. It wasn't that there was more information. I mean, there was more information, but not significantly more. What was different was that this information came through the court system in the condition of a guilty plea or a guilty verdict. And that did change everything because people started to take it really seriously.
So, Tom, one of the things that people are talking about is what is the standard really for impeachment? As you and I both know, it is political, not legal. And we earlier today had on Steve Moore from Heritage Foundation, and he basically said as long as the economy is doing really well, it's not going to matter much unless the president did something really bad. Listen to what he had to say.
As long as the economy stays as strong as it is, unless Donald Trump is truly guilty of a very high crime, I just don't think it's very likely to happen.
So Tom, what about that? How high a crime does that have to be?
Well, I think that the way to think about this, I know what it says in the Constitution about high crimes and misdemeanors. But I think the right way to think about it is, has the president broken his oath to to serve the American people? Has the president broken his oath to the Constitution? Is, in fact, our democracy under threat? And the answer to all of those questions is a resounding yes. And I believe that the man from the Heritage Foundation statement that if the economy is doing well, that therefore the American democracy is irrelevant, is one of the most profoundly cynical and short-sighted statements I've ever heard in my whole life.
So, Tom, to go back into history, President Nixon, of course, there were bills of impeachment drawn up against him. He was not impeached, but bills drawn up. And that was because of subverting the Constitution, as you just talked about. He was using his power in office to try to stop investigations. If you were writing the bills of impeachment against President Trump right now, what would be number one? What's the first part of the bill?
Well, let me say this, David. We asked 58 constitutional scholars that question last December, and we put their answers on the web. We made them refresh it in June. They came up with 9 different bases, grounds for his impeachment. But the number one for me is corruption. And I think that it's described in the Constitution as the emoluments clause, that you are not allowed to take any payment whatsoever from a foreign government, and obviously this president does it every single day. But when you ask me to rank them, it's almost as if you're saying, does that mean that therefore his continuing obvious obstruction of justice, which is an absolute ground for impeachment, isn't that important? It's absolutely important. So I think that truly, this is a president who is lawless on so many levels that it's hard to rank them. I happen to think personally that the one about corruption is so obvious and so measurable that it handles it for me personally.